And let me end this by saying this. I'm going to make this a part two. This is kind of sort of like a trilogue, not a monologue, but a trilogue, because it's third person. When I'm looking at Dr. Umar Johnson, I'm looking at, the Houthi Ma'at Ra, I'm looking at Tariq Nasheed, all these personalities who kind of got famous from, you know, the complication that blacks have with their relationship in America with others, and how they kind of use that to fix their movements to, get here into this position and get there to that position. Let the Dr. Umars be the Dr. Umars. Let the Dahudis be the Dahudis. Let the Tariqs be the Tariqs, because that's going to be a distraction for a lot of people who haven't found themselves. Like, I look at all the budgeting that comes from, people creating, second movements, third movements, the sort of be privileged to the fact that, I never saw that type of bird over there. But, we see, like, here's a speech coming. I need everybody to come out and listen to me. This thing. I grew up on that stuff. Dr. Krauss Wilson and Sonetta TVs. I grew up on that stuff. Like, and I quickly began to see that all these people are arguing with one another. And they're separated from their own envy. And I kept wondering, where's this stuff coming from where people are arguing? And then I started to realize that, okay, a lot of these people come from these movements, the 5% movements, that's the only one I see that's kind of credible. And then they come from like these Moorish movements, or they come from like the Israelite movements, like, because you notice that the Moors, originally at first, right, it started off as being like, pirates of the Caribbean who kind of came up to Carolina, and then they went over to Chicago, back from New Jersey and Newark and into Detroit. It started off as a movement where it was just like African looking people, right? And then it kind of sprung into like a movement where like all the people who were coming in from the industrial age mixing with the blacks, their sons and daughters start to take on the moniker of being a Moor. And these were like mixed mulattoes, mixed octoroons. They started to take on that. And then you start to see them spring from that movement and become like Israelites. And you hear Kodak Black, he says things like, I'm an Israelite, baby. He raps that in his songs. The only true sense that I can kind of see from movements that really sprung up and stayed the way that it was supposed to stay are tribes that didn't affect themselves with British colonials and French conquerors. They didn't affect themselves with that. These will be your tribes that stayed in desert areas where there was like, problems with, irrigation, problems with sewage lines and stuff. Like, these were those people who kind of lived primitively off of, wells and, those people. And you can see those people. Just look at the place names of these places where they are, right? You'll see there in Chicago. You'll see there in Nigeria, there in Ghana, in these coastline places. This is where they are, right? And I'm continually like seeing these things, and there's no more movements in America that we know of, right? Even the Black Panther movement, it's been infiltrated. All these movements have been infiltrated. This is why I'm very careful about listening to people who gives advice, in a sense that it comes from their own thought patterns that hasn't been thought over by a group of people. You know what I mean? This is why I don't mix in with the black community. I don't do it because when you're speaking your own language, there can be triggering moments for the people who are listening. And this is what happens with, you see, and I always notice this, right? when I'm listening to black people who are in wherever they are, because I don't see where they are, right? You know, not there's no need to hide. Like, you know, if we're black, you're supposed to communicate with people who are communicating with you. If you're hiding something, then it's not, whatever you're selling, it's not going to work. So you see this with like people who live in these communities, and you notice the first thing is by how the way that they talk. You know, if they talk with a corner pitch, then you know they probably have a white husband or a white wife. And it's gotten so random that you have people who speak Gullah, and you wouldn't even know if they had a white wife or a black wife. You wouldn't know. You know what I mean? Black women tend to not do that as much that I've seen, but, you know, in a sense that, you know, they're just not wanted by other men, you know, for whatever reason. Because they know if you speak with a Gullah tongue, you're probably going to come with a lot of problems. Because you haven't sort of, you know, scared into the scheme of being patronized, or, you know, being a patriot of a sense. If you speak with a corner pitch, they're going to think like, oh, this person, you know, they graduated from college, and they're going to want to get to know you. You know what I mean? Even if you have like manners, they're still going to want to get to know you. But if they see like you're just someone who yells and screams, the highest hue that person will probably get is probably, you know, well, I say that, yeah, that in that sense. But the only gender that they would get is a male. You know, if you get a white gender that's a female, right, then she's probably adopted the lifestyle of having grown up in a black community. But other than that, you know, and you see that in places like Wisconsin, you see it in places like Indiana, Ohio, especially Ohio. Some places in Michigan, you know, because that's a rust belt. But I think like with everything there comes choices, and all these choices have their own divides, which means everything has been seen and everything has been done. But, you know, back to my point, you know, there's always going to be, you know, spoon feeders and race hustlers. There's always going to be those type of people. Don't be distracted by that stuff. You know what I mean? I look at Dahudi Mahara, he stopped making videos when he came on the scene because he saw that the people weren't trying to really learn. They weren't trying to really be liberated. And he knew, like, man, I'm not trying to be like these other guys, you know, because that's going to, he was ahead of his time, though. He knew, like, that it wasn't going to work. Even with Dr. Umar, he's kind of just said, he settled with the fact that, you know, he's going to take advantage of gullible people, you know what I mean? But he's done it in the sense that he's been responsible enough to leave America by getting his Ghanaian citizenship. You know, so if you're a staunch black and you're still living in America, you're probably not going to want much to do with people here. You know, you've probably done your DNA markers, your haplogroups. You've probably done all of that, and you've probably thought like, man, let me advise myself. Let me talk to people in Africa. And you start to figure out when they say, like, you just need to come. You don't need to do all that, get a passport, citizenship. You have descent. All you need to do is just come. When you start to hear stuff like that, then you start to, like, strategize. Like, yeah, I need to save. I need to do this. I need to do that. You know, but a lot of us are just thinking, like, why even go back to Africa, right? You know, you can go to Jamaica. You can go to Haiti. You don't even have to go there. You can just go to Florida. A lot of Jamaicans are coming to Florida, and they're carrying the lifestyles that they lived as Rastafarians there into Florida. And you don't really have to even be that deep. Like, you can go to Florida. You know, there's other places in North America you can go, because there's plenty of towns where people just, you know, they don't know about, you know. And the thing is that people are trying to run away from this thug culture. I know myself, I am. You know, I don't want to cross paths with people who are toting, who have this sense of superiority around other people as far as, like, having an attraction to being around crime or near crime or always inhabiting crime. You know, you don't want to be around those people. You know, and you can just listen. Like when you hear someone talks and you see their study and you listen to their you know, their ad hominems, you listen to everything that they have to say, you quickly surmise that, you know, if this person isn't graduated to this sense where they figure things out without having gone to college, then what more do you need to figure out about them, you know? So I'm learning a lot, man. I'm learning a lot. You know, and as you hear the sirens in the background, the police sirens, like, you got to be careful about people's politics, you know? You got to be careful about their politics. You don't want to be in police states, because if it's in a police state, it's going towards, you know, dictatorship. It's going towards, you know, heavy theocracy, you know, where you can get punished for heresy. So it's important. If you're a Sentinel, you know, you got this, you're a Sentinel, you need to be documenting everything on video. You need to be documenting everything in writing. So you will need to spend a lot of time on the internet. Because it's simple. It's rolled out in this sense, right? If you do everything the right way, you continue to do what you need to do. You continue to politics. People are going to start to realize that, okay, this person has a community, or these people have a community, and it's going to grow into an empire, a nation. It's going to grow. That's why you don't see me on the internet, you know, around people who don't fit my goals, or they don't fit the scheme of realizing someone else's potential. You don't see me around those people, you know. Even the people who do the policing, you know what I mean? Like, you don't see me around people who look like them, you know what I mean? If you see me around somebody, this person is probably going to look like me, and I want to do this in the future. I want to do, I want to interview my cousin and have my cousin interview me. I want to do that because I got a bunch of cousins where, like, you know, we talk, you know, via email and social media, but, you know, we don't really get to get on video and like really hold engagements, because I know, like, they think the same thing that I'm thinking, right? I know they think the same thing that I'm thinking, but you got, and this is the last thing I want to talk about. You got to be, as we continue to grow our movements and we continue to support Burkina Faso, you got to be careful about these organizations like this, you know, American Psychiatric Association. You know what I mean? We got to be careful about these people, man. These white liberal organizations. We got to be careful about them, because, like, they're under the rogue sense of, you know, you go into their organizations, they're probably by a Presbyterian church, they're probably by an Episcopal church. You got to be careful about these people, man, because they're not going to tell you they're Catholic. They're going to say they're Christian just to make it seem like they're Baptist. But I don't know any white people who go to Baptist churches in Chicago. You know what I mean? So it's like, you got to be careful about all of that and the stuff that they try to put on you. You got to be careful, because, like, they're coming up with, you know, regulations all the time saying, you know, if you say this or you do this or you act this way, you know, it's going to be a violation of, you know, my rights because you said this. You know what I mean? Like, you got to be careful about all of that. You got to sort of walk around and tour around the things you want to say, but make it sound better where people can really understand it and gather in their own thoughts of what you wanted to say. Because, like, I'm looking at this, right? And I saw this in Chicago. Wherever Presbyterian church was, it was like a bunch of gangs in that area. You know, and you saw this in the 50s and the 60s and the 40s. You saw this, you know. And I was just riding past a place, and the health partner was telling me, he was like, this is where the gangsters sit at all the time. And I'm just looking over there, and I'm looking at all these people. It's just older white men that's standing outside a business, just, you know, playing chess, playing cards. And this is where they retire at. And, you know, this stuff, man, this American whole plot that we see is wicked. It's wicked, you know. Africans' presence, you know, if I see an African that's really doing something that's really like productive, outside of like passenger and freight, you know, they're probably in military service. You know what I mean? And they stay in there. And this is what all black people should be doing. They should be in service. Like, don't grow up thinking, and I said this in the last video, like, don't grow up thinking like, you know, you're just kind of going to let life fly by. You don't want to really make nothing of yourself. Like, go to the military, like, get a visa and travel. You know what I'm saying? Do something else in another country where it's like, you know, be a health educator in Sierra Leone or something like that. Don't just sit in America and think you work at the local grocery mart. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that. You know what I mean? Like, that's... And people who are afforded to think like that, I'm always wondering, like, you know, who instilled their values? You know, like, I'm always wondering that. And there's a hawk right there. But I'm always wondering. It doesn't make any sense, you know? Like, you should be on LinkedIn making connections with people in Africa. You should be on Facebook making connections with people in Africa. You should be going to these video seminars with the United Nations. I do all this stuff. Like, you should be doing these things, like getting people familiar with your name, getting people familiar with your values, getting people familiar with the things that you want to contribute to society. Are you for ending plastic pollution? Are you for ending abortion? Are you for ending police terrorism? Like, what are you really about? You know what I mean? I never understood why people would just say, I'm 18 now, I'm not going to college, I'll go work at the local grocery store. I don't think that's short-minded. When I was 18, I went to the military. I got out, and when I got out, I was thinking about what else am I going to do. I went to Minnesota, went to school. I got out of there thinking about what else am I going to do. Now I'm at this stage in my life, you know what I'm saying? Like, I still want to do more, and I'm doing more, you know, contributing to organizations that have, you know, fixated on helping orphanages. Like, you want to help orphanages, like, you know, like if you can help an African orphanage, you know, or you can invest in economy somewhere else. And this is kind of like a whole guarantee of what I've been saying past, but just, you know, differently. You know, just do those things, man, because, like, and I heard this lady say this. She was walking with Bettis. I don't know what last name that is. Bettis. I don't know what last name that is. He's the police chief in Detroit. And she was saying this to him. She was like, what did she say? She said, the young people are taking over our communities. And I'm like, aren't they supposed to do that? You know what I mean? And again, you got to be careful about where people come from and who they are and where their political values are. You know, if you are someone who doesn't want to see black people become the next mayor, you don't want to see, unless they look a certain way, right? You know what I mean? Or unless they're a certain gender, you know. I automatically know what people are about just by listening. The first words that come out of their mouth, I know what they're about, you know. You want to put young people down. You don't want to see young people make something of themselves. It's like, who taught you how to run government? You know what I mean? Like, who taught you these things? And, like, I want to see young people be successful. You know what I mean? Like, just everybody's not fit to be living in regular society, man, because the stuff that people say and the stuff that people do, it puts other people's lives in danger. You know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't be saying young people are taking over our communities like they're somehow a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like, you know, my thing would be like, if you living in a community where there's like kids steady running around and doing harmful things to the environment, smoking, getting in shootouts while they sitting in cars, and then you need to be thinking about, you know, how can I organize their parents to do something about what their children are doing? If your children is outside causing problems for other people, they need to be in a psychiatric facility. You know what I mean? Like, and if they're not in a psychiatric facility, they need to be deported, period. You know, they need to be deported to a plantation so they can work, you know? And again, this comes with just using simple math. Like, just because a person is not fit in society means that harm has to be done to them. It doesn't mean that. It just means that they need to, something needs to work for them. You know what I mean? Like, you always heard about the kids, you know, who got into trouble in the 90s growing up in Chicago. They got sent to the Adi home, or, you know, it was something petty like that, right? You know, and you see how these people turned out, right? You know, they're still having problems with legal issues up into their 40s and 50s. They're still having problems. You know, great piece, Shakoki.